4 years since the financial crisis and nearly 2 years since the passage of the Dodd-Frank financial reform law, and its implementation is behind schedule while opponents try to weaken the law. At the same time, the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas says Dodd-Frank has not solved the problem of banks that are too big to fail. In fact, the Dallas Fed says Dodd-Frank may actually perpetuate concentration in the banking system and hold back economic recovery unless the banks are broken up into smaller units. According to the Dallas Fed, more than half of the banking industry's assets are on the books of just 5 banks. The top 10 banks now account for 61% of commercial banking assets, compared with only 26% 20 years ago. Their combined assets equate to half of America's GDP. Joining me now to discuss this, as well as the implementation of Dodd-Frank, is Paul Kanjorski, principal of Kanjorski and Associates, the author of the Too Big to Fail Amendment of the Financial Reform Law, and a former congressman from Pennsylvania who served as chairman of the House Subcommittee on Capital Markets and is a member of the House Financial Services Committee during his 26 years in the House. Congressman, welcome to the program. Thank you so much for coming on.
It's my pleasure, Jen.
What's your reaction to the Dallas Fed? Doesn't your amendment give regulators the power to preemptively break up banks that pose a systemic risk to the financial system and the economy?
Yes, it does. And I don't know whether Dallas is aware of that or Mr. Fisher is aware of that, but I assume he is. I think he's not certain that it will be implemented the way it's written in the law, and that's the problem area. But I agree, his analysis is if we don't do something with these huge institutions, they're going to continue to grow and eventually be uncontrolled and systemically riskful. I mean, you know, if you look at what's happening in Europe and you see Asia growing the way it is, and now America having the problems we've had in the last 4 years, it could very easily set the whole system out of control. And that would be very dangerous to us. So, although they make good observations, the question is, what should we do about them? And I think you have your handle on it, is that word, implement.
Why do you think this has been swept under the rug?
I don't know that the institutions wanted to concede that the power was there, and I don't know whether the administration wanted to concede that the power was there. And certainly I'm sort of disappointed with the commentators of financial services, because they have not proposed that. You know, I'll give you an interesting thing. We were watching their writing on the subject, and about 80% of those that were writing about it had no idea that Too Big to Fail amendment was included in the bill. So obviously they hadn't read the bill, or if they did read the bill, they didn't understand that amendment and what powers it contained. But that's not unusual. A lot of people who pass and comment on these bills, I find one of the reasons I like to come on your program, Jim, is you are well prepared and you understand what you're talking about. That's
well, thank
important.
you, Congressman. Do you think the Systemic Risk Council will eventually move to break up this nation's largest banks?
Well, you know, it may not look like that now, but I think we have strong people. I think that I've been watching. I wasn't too impressed initially with the concept of investor protection portions of regulatory authority. But I think we have a strong appointed Attorney General there who understands that he can move on that area. So it may end up being a much better piece of legislation than I originally anticipated to be. So, no, I think it all goes back to whether or not we have serious-minded people who are willing to implement laws. And if they have the nerve and the courage to do it, we'll have a good piece of legislation and it's sufficient. If we don't, we'll get a remake.
Given the prominent role that you played in forming the Dodd-Frank financial reform law, what is your take on the implementation process thus far?
Well, you know, there was the argument we had, as a matter of fact, I went to Europe and met with the European regulators. They have a little bit of a different take, particularly United Kingdom. They have a single central regulator in financial services. Here we have broken it up in many areas. We have as many as a dozen regulators, and a goodly part of them are part of the council. And some aren't necessarily regulating things that are as important as banks or as important as insurance companies. They're spread all over the world. So that when you put the council together, it's very difficult to determine who's going to get a vote and what weight will be given to their vote when you're making this determination as to whether or not there's systemic risk. So our system is very difficult to deal with those type of inadequacies.
So do you think we put too many people on the so-called Systemic Risk Council?
I think that's a possibility.
Do you think it's going to work when push comes to shove?
We're going to see. I mean, you know, they're either going to be able to put it together and begin to utilize it, or else it will fall apart. And at our next crisis period, and there will be one because the world economy has changed so significantly, you know, it will then deteriorate much faster than it did before.
Let's talk about the Volcker Rule, because arguably it's probably the most controversial piece of Dodd-Frank. And for the purposes of viewers, it was named for its champion, former Fed Chairman Paul Volcker, and it bans banks from proprietary trading or trading for their own account to rein in excessive risk-taking. So regulators have said, point blank, they're probably going to miss the July 21st deadline for implementation. We have a sitting SEC commissioner as well as former FDIC Chair Sheila Bair that have said the rule should be reproposed. And as you mentioned, Barney Frank says it's too complex. Let's scrap it. Let's propose something that's a little bit more simpler. Do you agree?
It's awfully complicated, no question about that. And one of the mistakes government makes is that, and I wish we didn't have to, but unfortunately, they try and cover every aspect, and then, you know, lawyers find their way around those aspects anyway. The average people don't have those type of talented lawyers to find their way around. So it's disadvantageous to the system that wealth gets better treatment under the law because they can afford the best talent to invade the law and see how they can manipulate it. That's not the fair system. It's not how we should operate. But I mean, everything could be done better.
All right, Congressman Kanjorski, thank you so much.